Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining us for another rendition of the B&H Virtual Event Space. I am very happy to be joined back by resident veteran of the Virtual Event Space, Mr. Tony Gale. Tony, what's going on? What's happening?
Not much. Summer's here. It's a little too humid. Other than that, things are good.
Yeah, I could definitely relate to that. I haven't had the AC on all day today, and I'm still questioning why.
I think you've made some poor decisions.
if you come back and you see me just melted away, you know why. It's because I haven't had the AC on. So thanks for being back here, Tony. It's always a pleasure to have you. I want to give a special thanks to Sony for setting this up and sponsoring the event. It's always a great day when we get Tony in the house. So thanks for being here. He's going to be talking today about managing your digital workflow. So something that I think everybody could take at least one thing away from. I know I always take a lot away from these kind of events because I have terrible workflow management. So I'm going to sit back and kind of, write some stuff down while Tony goes through it. Anybody who has any questions, Zoom, you know the deal. Drop any questions you have in the Q&A for live stream and Facebook. Use the comment section and we'll get all of your questions as they come over to Tony. Otherwise, Tony, the floor is yours. You know the deal. Thanks for being here.
Thank you very much. Hi, everybody. I am Tony Gale. I'm a Sony Artisan of Imagery. So I also want to jump in and say thanks to Sony for having me. And thanks to the B&H Event Space, as always, for having me. Without them, I wouldn't be here. I'm also a Manfrotto ambassador, an ex-Rite Coloradi, and the APA national president, in case any of those topics come up. All right. I am a New York City-based portrait photographer. Primarily, I shoot some landscape travel stuff for fun. I shoot for a variety of editorial, corporate, and advertising clients. Every presentation I do, I talk about this, which is we are in an exciting time to be photographers. We're talking about workflow here. The workflow when I started was you go to the store, maybe you go to B&H, you buy a bunch of film. You shoot, if it's medium format, maybe 12 frames per roll. If it's 35, you shoot 36 frames per roll. Next step is you go to the lab and you get it processed. Maybe it's slides, maybe it's contact sheets. It takes a little while for that to happen. If it's a pro lab, maybe a couple hours or a few days, you spend a bunch of money, you get it back, you finally have an idea of what you photographed, you put it in a filing cabinet. Unless you print it, that picture doesn't exist. Now, everything's changed. What we can do with digital is amazing. Not only just the fact that when I was shooting film, 3200 speed black and white was the fastest film that you could get, and it was only in black and white. Right now, the camera pointed at me is at 3200 ISO in color, and it looks just fine. Everything now is so much easier to do and so much cooler. And, well, there are things I loved about film. I do not miss paying for film and processing. All right, so digital workflow. Mostly photographed or mostly focused on stills. I'll mention video a little bit, and mostly focused on using a camera, a dedicated camera. But whether you use a phone or a camera, most of this stuff will apply and you can use it either way. Quickly, I'm going to go over setting up a camera, capturing images, transferring images to a computer, importing into whatever you use, organizing, sorting, post-processing, exporting, backing up, and then what do you do with the pictures at the end? It's a lot to cover. So I may go quick. I may see things that you're not sure about. If you aren't, just ask. There's no harm in asking a question. All of us can learn more things. All right, so first, setting up the camera. Before you set up the camera, you have to choose your gear and you have to be prepared. So this is an example. I went on a trip a couple of weeks ago to a bunch of national parks out west. One of the first things I do anytime I do that before you start any shoot is what gear do you need? What do I need to do to be prepared for this? That's the first part of the workflow. If you go on a shoot and you have the wrong lens or the wrong camera, or you didn't bring enough cards or enough batteries or whatever, you're dead in the water. Like, it doesn't matter what your workflow is and how good it is if you can't take pictures when you get there. So as an example, on this trip, I brought my 70-200G, my 21.8G, my 35 1.8, my 14 1.8 G Master, an A1, an A7R4, 1224G, 24105, 2414G M, and the 2X extender. If it's a different trip, like today I did some corporate portraits, all I brought was an A7R3 because they like the files a little smaller for this particular client, and a 70-200 f4. One camera, one lens today, all of this stuff for that trip out west. It's just going to depend on what you need, but make sure you have the right tools. And then if you look at this and you say, that's a lot of stuff in a bag, there is also the super cool, relatively new Sony compact lenses that they've made, the compact primes, typically made for something like the Alpha 7C, but you can put them on any Alpha camera. They're really compact, really great lenses, 24 2.8, 40 2.5, 50 2.5. They're not as fast as something like the GMs, but they're smaller and lighter, and everything's a balance. You know, if you're going to do a bunch of hiking, maybe you don't want a heavy lens. Maybe having a 2.5 or a 2.550 instead of the 1.2 when it's smaller and lighter, maybe that's the answer. Maybe it's not, but it's something to be aware of and something to think about. All right, so you've thought about your camera, you thought about your lens, you brought a bunch of extra batteries. You also want to think about your cards. There's different kinds of cards, there's different speeds of cards. I only use Sony cards. You can use whatever cards you like. However, I would recommend that you not buy the cheap cards. Like, you know, you go to B&H and you can say, I want to look at 128 gigabyte SD card, and you can sort by price. Probably whatever is at the lowest end, I'm sure it's fine, but I'm more comfortable with something maybe a little bit more expensive. So there are things like the Sony Tough cards that are designed to take a beating. They're faster. The speed of the card matters for some things and not so much other things. It matters for downloading the files at the end. It matters if you're shooting quickly or shooting high bitrate video. If you're shooting 8K video or 4K video at a high bitrate, the speed of the card matters. If you're photographing landscapes and you're taking a picture and then 20 seconds later you're taking another picture and then 20 seconds later you're taking another picture, it matters less. Like, there's reasons to go for the super fast cards, but they're not right for everybody. Are they right for you? I don't know. For me, I shoot really, really fast, way too fast, and I take way too many pictures. So I go for the fastest cards I can get. But they're not the right answer for everybody. Just like the 51.2 GM, right answer for some people, the 52.5, right answer for some people, the 51.8 for some people. Anybody who tells you that any particular thing is the right answer for everybody, it's probably worth questioning. Different cameras, different lenses, different cards. It matters to different people. But so the speed of the card, that varies. The quality of the card, you want to make sure that it's a quality card. You also want to make sure that you're buying it from a reputable dealer. There's been a lot of counterfeit cards. Like, if you, let's say you buy them online from some weird website, they might be legit, they might not. If they're not legit, you could run into problems. To save $20 or $10, it's not worth it. Buy a card from a reputable dealer, whatever brand, whatever speed. All right, setting up the camera. I always shoot in RAW. I'll sometimes do RAW plus JPEG. So first step, and really I just do this when I buy a camera and then I don't ever have to touch it again. Set the camera to RAW. Do you have to shoot RAW? No. It will take up more space. It's more work on the back end, but the flexibility it gives you is absolutely worth those two compromises. It allows you, if you make a mistake on exposure or white balance, not so much a big deal. Years ago, I was shooting this huge event, and before I shot mirrorless, so when I looked through the lens, you know, I saw an exposure, I saw what the lens saw, but not what the exposure was. And I accidentally exposed this group shot of 200 people. I overexposed it by 2 stops. Because it was RAW, I was able to pull it in. If I had been shooting Sony mirrorless at the time, it was before Sony mirrorless existed, I wouldn't even have made that mistake because I would have seen that it was overexposed. But if that had been a JPEG, game over. There's like, it would have been over. There's no way to recover that if it had been JPEG. RAW will save your bacon. But I do know people that swear up and down that JPEG is all they ever need. So go with what works for you. So you can do RAW plus JPEG, JPEG. If you're on the fence, if you haven't shot RAW much before, try RAW plus JPEG, see how it goes. I started with that, and then I realized that I was just throwing away all the JPEGs anyway, so I stopped with the JPEG part. Depending on your camera, this is the Alpha 1. You may have uncompressed RAW, you may have compressed RAW, you may have lossless compressed RAW. Which one I use depends on what I'm photographing. I will sometimes use compressed RAW. With the Alpha 1, I almost always use lossless compressed now. But with the R4, for example, I have uncompressed and compressed. The lossless compressed is a new option. If I don't have lossless compressed, if I'm photographing something with a lot of color or a lot of gradation or really a lot of detail, I'll do uncompressed. If I'm photographing quickly, if I'm photographing an event or lifestyle or running around an office photographing people working, I'll usually use compressed. In all honesty, I haven't seen much difference between compressed and uncompressed. Every once in a while, you might see a difference in a subtle gradation in sky. Like if you're photographing a blue sky that goes from dark blue to light blue, maybe you'll see some difference. Most of the time, I don't see much of a difference on the Sonys. That said, I'll still shoot in uncompressed sometimes, even though the file size is twice as big, just to be safe. Hard drives are cheap. If you're using a phone, so this is the Sony Xperia 5 Mark II. That phone has a really cool app, Photography Pro, which mimics some of the Sony Alpha settings. So with that, for example, I can go to Menu and select RAW or RAW plus JPEG or JPEG in that menu and photograph RAW with the phone. So my phone is also set to photograph in RAW. On my phone, actually, I have it set to RAW plus JPEG because I'll sometimes use the JPEGs. Whatever you're using, just make sure you have it set to the highest quality. If you're photographing with another phone that doesn't shoot RAW, make sure you're set to the highest JPEG quality possible. But if there's any way to shoot RAW, I would do it. And then if you're shooting video, just make sure it's whatever it is you need. So I usually leave it on 4K, XAVC HS 4K. This is the Alpha 1 still. Sometimes 8K, sometimes something smaller. It really just depends on what you need. The most important thing with this is that there's no right or wrong answer. It's just double checking before you start to make sure it's whatever's right for you in that moment. Check your frame rate, check your record settings. I usually shoot 24p, 422 10-bit. Make sure if you want to be in 24p or 120p, 60p, whatever it is, just make sure it's set. The differences here are 422 is better quality than 420. It has to do with the way that the color is interpreted. 10-bit, they're all 10-bit. 100 megabits per second is more information, so it'll take up more space on the card. Depending on your video editing software, it may or may not be more work. It's a little bit like compressed and uncompressed. Sometimes it's going to make a difference, sometimes not so much. If your camera, and I believe all the Sonys do this, all the ones I've had for years, offers it, make sure that you put right copyright info on and that you set the photographer copyright and display copyright info. What that does is every picture has EXIF data. It's got information that's part of the picture that's text readable, that if someone's looking, they can find out whose picture that is. So if someone uploads your picture to the internet, even though some websites will strip it out, but in a optimistic scenario, they upload it to the internet, somebody is like, that's the most amazing picture ever. We want to use that picture and we're going to be ethical and contact the photographer to get permission or to pay them. It makes it easy for them to find them. And by doing that in the camera, it will write it to every picture you take. So photographer, copyright holder. I also have the right serial number on. That's going to depend on your camera. The reason for that is twofold. One is if for some reason stuff is stolen, sometimes you can find it because of the serial number. because unless someone changes it, if someone takes a picture with it later, that serial number will still be part of it. That's hopefully never going to happen, and a little bit of a long shot because you'd still have to find it. But it also allows you, if you're photographing with two cameras that are the same, like two alpha ones, by writing the serial number, you can sort by camera 1 and camera 2 and separate the files if you need to, or if there's a problem, you'll know. And then if you're going to shoot tethered, PC remote on, depending on which camera you're using, PC remote connect method, USB or wireless or whatever. If you're photographing with a Sony with the R4 or later, our PC remote connect method needs to be turned to USB. If you're photographing with the R3 or earlier, you probably just need to turn PC remote on. And then you can do USB, wired LAN, Wi-Fi direct, Wi-Fi access point. I usually do USB. Next, make sure you've got your white balance set correctly. If you're photographing RAW and you're using a gray card, you can sort of skip this step. If you're not, or if you're shooting video, and definitely if you're shooting JPEGs, you want to make sure that you set your white balance to whatever is appropriate. Shade, whatever. If you're shooting video, do a custom white balance. I know there's flexibility, maybe you don't need to, but every time I haven't done a custom white balance with video, I've wished I did a custom white balance with video. It's pretty simple. You just go to the set settings, go over, point it at a spectrally neutral thing. This is my X-Rite color checker passport. It's got a neutral gray, light gray thing for white balance. Just put it on there, bam. It automatically sets the white balance. It knew when I did this, it was 3,700 degrees Kelvin. There was no AB shift, but the green magenta shift was 1 magenta. That's hard to do by eye. This just does it automatically, so it's accurate. If you're shooting again with Photo Pro on like the Xperia 5 Mark II or 1 Mark II or the Xperia 1 Mark III, you have custom white balance. So on the lower right, you've got the white balance and you can just select whatever it is you need or do a custom white balance there as well. All right, your camera's set up, you're ready to go. Maybe you want to tether. Tethering is where you are connected to a device so that the pictures you take go to that device. If you're shooting with Sony, you can tell it to write to the card and to the computer, which is what I do, so that I have a backup automatically. And when I'm shooting tethered, I'm mostly wired. With the newer cameras, you can do wireless Wi-Fi tethering, but even the fast Wi-Fi is still slower than a USB-C cable. So I'll usually do wired. Reasons to do tethered are you can see exactly what you're going to get. Much easier. It's easier for your client to see it or your friend to see it or you to see it. Like if you want to zoom in, like, is everything sharp? Is everything what I need? That's easier to do on a big screen from your laptop. I use an external monitor, a BenQ external monitor with my laptop. There's different options. If you're just photographing, it's just you and whoever you're photographing and you don't care to show anybody anything, you probably don't need to tether. Some people will tether 100% of the time. Some people will tether 0% of the time. Again, it's one of those things. There is no right or wrong answer. When I am photographing for a client, if the client is there, I'm mostly photographing tethered just so that they can see what they want. You know, things come up, boom. If you're going to photograph tethered, Capture One is a great software. It's what I use. Sony has Imaging Edge, which is a free download if you photograph with a Sony that will let you shoot tethered. Lightroom does not tether natively with Sony, but Tether Tools has an app that you can buy. I think it's $30 or $40 that will let you shoot tethered with Sony into Lightroom. There's options. And then you also can use a phone or a mobile device. You can use your iPad, you can use your phone, and control a smartphone so that when you are photographing with your camera, those files are going to your phone or to your tablet. I use this a lot if I'm on set without an assistant and I need to set up the lighting and take a look. So this was me setting up something today, actually. It's a way for me to do test shots of myself and see what's happening without worrying about doing the timer and all of that stuff. So it's pretty easy to do. It's in the menu. I'm not going to go into all the details, but It works great. And sometimes if I'm working with a client, I'll do the same thing with my iPad Pro so that they can see everything coming up. It's also a way to control your camera remotely. So if you are photographing something and you want a remote for your camera and you don't have one, you can use your phone. All right, so you've taken pictures, they're on a card, they're on a computer. Now they're on a card, or if you're shooting tethered, they're on a computer. But assuming that they're not, how are you going to transfer them to computer? Some people will just plug a cable into their camera or into their phone and then into the computer. I typically photograph more than one card. I'll film more than one card on the shoot pretty frequently. So using the camera with a cable isn't really practical. I also don't really like having the camera sitting there on the desk with cables running to it. So I'll use a card reader. It's usually faster. It's definitely easier for me. Plug in the card reader. Navigate to the DCIM folder. And then within that, there will be another folder. If you're on Sony, every camera system's different, but it should be roughly the same. It's almost always DCIM. There's usually a subfolder. I will rename that subfolder with the date. So that, for example, April 3rd, 2021, I renamed that folder 21_0403. The reason for that is that's how I sort all of my files. Everything from April 3rd is in one folder. But also by renaming that subfolder, if I put that card back in a camera, which I will eventually, one of the first things I do every time I put a card in the camera is hit the play button just to see what's on that card, to make sure I didn't make a horrible mistake, which I did once, like 15 years ago, and reformat a card I hadn't downloaded. You want to avoid that at all costs, because if you reformat a card and figure it out right away, you can usually recover those files with software. If you reformat a card and then shoot a bunch of new pictures on it, you can't recover the stuff that was on it before. By doing this, when I hit play, it says it can't see the images, and I know that I've done this. I know that I've renamed that folder, and that's why I can't see it. So that's why I do it that way. Everybody's got their own process, but that's mine. And then I just drag and drop that folder to my working drive and start from there. If I'm downloading from my phone, I will sometimes use the micro SD card, but I will also use FTP. So you can get free FTP apps for your phone. If you're on Windows, I know I'm one of the few photographers on Windows. You just go into the Finder window, type in the FTP, launch the FTP app on your phone, bam, there it is. Just shows up, DCIM, Imaging Edge Mobile, Photography Pro, and just drag and drop onto your computer. It is slower than like pulling the card out, but it's just simple. Like I don't need a cable. I don't need to pull the card out. I can just drag and drop. And I don't usually shoot the volume of photos with my phone. It'll be a handful with my phone. If I'm shooting thousands, it's going to be with a camera. All right. Next. So you've downloaded your files. You've got to do something with them, right? You can't just have a bunch of files sitting there for no good reason. So you want to import into an app. You want to do something with an app. So you could use Bridge if you have Bridge. The first thing I do with anything, as soon as I've imported it, and sometimes before I've imported, and I use Bridge because with Bridge you don't import, you just navigate to that folder, is rename. So in Bridge, batch rename, same thing. So I named the folder 21, whatever that other one was. This one is 21_0704. It was on the 4th of July. The folder's named that. The files within that folder are named that, and then a number, either a 3-digit number or 4-digit number. The reason I do that is if you do not rename your files every 10,000 pictures, you're going to restart that naming. Every camera that I'm aware of goes from 0 to 9999, and then it goes back to 0. So eventually you're going to end up with 5 pictures that all have the same name unless you rename it. The reason I use a date is because today, so today is whatever it is, July 28th. So 210708 will never come again. I mean, in 100 years, it'll come again, but that's not going to be a problem, I don't think, for me, unless science really advances. So by using the date, I can make sure that that file name never is used again. It makes it easy to sort the files. It makes it easy to find the files. If you don't use bridge, you can use capture one. Same thing, right click, batch rename, same thing. 4-digit counter, 3-digit counter, whatever. I know I'm going quickly, but it's because there's a lot to cover and there's only so much time. Scott has to go get his dinner at some point. All right, so you've renamed. You can also do it in Lightroom, although I rarely do it in Lightroom, even though I use Lightroom. You've renamed. The next thing before anything else is to back up. And I know I said at the beginning, there's different ways to do things and you've got options and not everybody should do things the same way necessarily. Everyone should back up. Everyone. Every hard drive will fail eventually. It doesn't matter if it's the best hard drive in the world. It doesn't matter that you take care of it. None of that matters. Eventually it will fail. And even I learned recently, I don't know how it works, about something called bit rot, where a hard drive that you've backed up to that sits there and it isn't on, eventually can get corrupted somehow on its own. So first, before you do anything, after you've renamed, back up. So I've got my local working drive that everything goes on while I'm still doing stuff to it. And then I back up to 2 external drives. I have bigger desktop drives that I keep at my office. And then I have the smaller portable drives that I bring home, so that there's a copy at home, there's a copy at the office. If something happens at the office or something happens at home, I haven't lost the only copy. So initially it's on the working drive. It's on 2 different backup drives. I'm going to reiterate, always back up. My big drives, my little drives. The little drives go home because they're little. I don't need power supplies for them. You can see as files got bigger. 2013 and 14 were on one 5 terabyte drive. 2015 and a third of 2016 were on one, and it just gets smaller as files get bigger. All right, so you backed up. You're gonna organize, sort, figure out what you're gonna do. At this point, you wanna make sure that your color management is on point. So color management is just making sure that the color is consistent and controlled and accurate across everything. I have heard people say, why should I calibrate my monitor, for example, because I don't know what everybody else is looking at it on and theirs may not be calibrated. It is true that you can't control what people are looking at it. Maybe somebody's looking on their phone, they're looking on their 2008 laptop, whatever they're looking at, the color's probably wrong. That's true. However, if your color is accurate, it's going to be less wrong on their device. If your computer, for example, is a little bit warm and their computer is a little bit cool, there's a huge difference between those two. But if yours is right in the middle and accurate and theirs is a little bit warm, then it's a little bit warm. If theirs is a little cool, it's a little bit cool. It's not a huge difference. It's really, 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 really a valuable thing to do proper color management. Get a color calibrator. I use the X-Rite stuff. That's why I became a Colorati. Make sure your color management is accurate. So you've done that. Now I'm going to sort by shot and subject. So let's say I photographed 10 people. I'm going to sort those folders, those files, so that person 1 is here, person 2 is here, person 3 is here, probably in separate folders, subfolders of that folder with a date, so that it's easy to keep track of who's who. Then I'm going to go through and rate the images. So the easiest way I find to rate things, even though I don't use Lightroom for everything, is Lightroom. So Lightroom, I always create a new catalog. I don't use Lightroom for its catalog stuff. I use it for other things. So I'll create a new catalog for every project, import, select everything, and then I'll just go through. And if you turn your caps lock on in Lightroom and you just have one key on 0 and one key on 1, if you hit 0, or if you hit any number, it advances to the next picture. So I can quickly go through just 0, 0, 0, 0. Oh, that's a maybe. I'll hit 1, 0, 0, maybe 1. Anything that's not a maybe gets a 0. And it's a way to quickly go through everything. and then I'll narrow it down. Then I'll sort by the ones. Here's the ones, here they are. I'll look at the ones, sort some more, and narrow it down until I have the winners. Empire State Building on the 4th of July from my roof in Brooklyn. Sun. Then, you do whatever you're going to do. Maybe you do some processing, adjust the white balance, adjust the contrast, maybe straighten it out. My tripod wasn't quite straight. Now it's straight. Sync everything. If you're going to do stuff in Lightroom and you're going to sync everything, which you do by selecting everything that you want those to apply to and hitting synchronize settings there on the right. When this box comes up, if you've rotated things and you want that to be the same, you have to hit the little box for crop on the right. If you don't, it won't apply that rotation and crop. All right, so you do all that. Now, everything's there. You start sorting things further than we have. One great thing about Lightroom, for example, Bridge, a lot of the different options are that if you need to, you can sort using that metadata. So we talked about metadata with your copyright info. There's also metadata that says what camera you photographed with, what lens you photographed with. So in Lightroom, if you need to know what lenses did I use, you can look at this. So I, for example, in this catalog, there's 1,330 images, 10 different lenses. 15 of them were the 90 macro. One was with the RX100 Mark VI. I love that camera. 35 with the 1224 f4. 876 with the 24105 f4. You can see what you're using. Maybe somebody says, hey, like on the Facebook groups all the time, I see, oh, I'm thinking about buying this lens. Does anybody have pictures with this lens? If you're the kind of person that wants to be helpful, you can just do this, sort, and find the pictures you've taken with that lens. It's also when you're trying to decide, do I need another lens? Because of course we all want more lenses. I keep thinking I have enough, and then they come out with something super cool, and I'm like, oh, I didn't think I needed a 21.8, and then they came out with it, and then I had to buy it. This gives you an option to see what lenses you're using. So what might make either what's missing or what might make sense. All right. So you've done all that. You've sorted, you've picked your pictures. Maybe you've adjusted things a little. We sort of skipped the white balance part. I mentioned early on that if you're shooting raw with a gray card, you don't necessarily need to set your white balance or do a custom white balance. The reason for that is with a gray card like this, again, the X-Rite Color Checker Passport, in Capture One, in Lightroom, in Lightroom, in Bridge, no, that's still Lightroom. All you do is take the eyedropper in the develop module. You put it on the gray patch on whatever you're using. It is important to use something designed for this. Like sometimes people use just a white piece of paper. The problem with a white piece of paper is it's not actually white. It's just white-ish. You want something that's spectrally neutral and actually designed for this. You just click on that and boom, it neutralizes it. Just like that. And then you can just sync those across the board to everything. You also, when you're processing, may want to think about what profile to use. So whatever software you're using is going to have a default profile. Adobe, like Lightroom, Adobe Standard, a custom profile, camera clear, camera neutral. All of these are the same picture with the same white balance, but they look dramatically different because it's a different profile. So whatever profile you want to use, again, there's no right or wrong here necessarily, but you should make sure that it's a profile that is what you want. You know, experiment with something, see what you like. I have seen people panic because somehow this got changed and all of a sudden they've taken a bunch of pictures and they don't look like the pictures they took yesterday. And the reason was because somehow this profile got changed when in their processing, and now everything looks different. So think about that. I'm a big fan of custom profiles. This is where they are in Lightroom, Adobe Camera Raw or Bridge. That's actually an old version of Bridge. Capture One. Going to go back to make sure your monitor is calibrated. When you're dealing with the files, use non-destructive editing tools. So either use Lightroom or Capture One and output and you're done. That's never enough for me. I always have to bring things into Photoshop. So if you're going to do that, use layers so it's non-destructive. What that means is I can change things and then change it back without affecting the image. I can make it brighter or darker with a layer, and then I can remove that layer, change that layer. It hasn't affected the original pixels. If you do destructive editing, which is just doing, say, curves or levels or whatever on your TIFF or JPEG, and then you want to change it again later, every time you do that, it's going to degrade a little. You're going to be limited in what you can do, and it's going to affect the image in a negative way over time. We mentioned color profiles. Also, just going to mention quickly, you can think about, do you want sRGB, Adobe RGB 1998, ProPhoto RGB? As an example, Adobe RGB 1998, which is the field in white, has more color information. There's more color available to it than sRGB. sRGB is a smaller color space. There's less information. For a long time, almost everything on the web really only saw sRGB. So if you uploaded Adobe RGB 1998, web browsers couldn't deal with it, and it sometimes didn't look very good. That's changed a bit, but I still think best practice is to use sRGB if it's going to be on the web. If it's my master file, which is what I do, I'll process everything. I'll process everything and into a TIFF typically. And that master file is what if I need a JPEG, I'll take that master file and save out a copy as a JPEG or whatever. That's almost always Adobe RGB 1998. For a while, I was doing ProPhoto RGB, which is an even bigger color space. But I found I wasn't really taking advantage of that. So you're processing. You've done all your stuff. You've renamed. You've adjusted the color. You've used non-destructive editing. You want to send the file to someone. Do you want it to be a JPEG or a TIFF? JPEG is a smaller file. It's a compression. TIFFs are uncompressed. So TIFFs take up a lot more space. But because it's not a compression, there's more information there if something needs to change. If you open a JPEG and then save it, and then open it and save it, and open it and save it enough times, it starts degrading. If you open a TIFF and resave it, it's not going to degrade. It may degrade because you do stuff to it, but it won't degrade. So every master file I have, and again, every picture that I process, there's a TIFF that's the master TIFF with the layers and whatever that exists. And then if I need a JPEG, I'll just save a copy of it. 8-bit or 16-bit. So 8-bit is 16.8 million colors. It's a lot of colors, 256 per channel. 16-bit is 281 trillion colors, 65,536 per channel. It's a lot more color. Most cameras don't actually capture in 16-bit. They capture, a lot of them are 12. I think all the Sonys are 14. If you capture in 14, when you process, your choice is 8 or 16. So just process out of 16. 16-bit takes up twice as much space as 8-bit. And when I deliver files, I always deliver an 8-bit because people sometimes can't deal with 16-bit. But again, for that master file to have the best quality to start with, I use 16-bit. So if you are in Lightroom, you're trying to figure that out, you go to export, you bring up the export dialog, select JPEG, PSD, TIFF, PNG, whatever. I use TIFFs, not PSDs, just because I feel like TIFFs are more broadly recognized, like more different software can use it. I don't know that that's actually true. That's in my head. It may or may not be true. JPEGs, everything can read, but again, it's a compression. If you pick a JPEG, you've also got the quality level, which is how compressed it is. 12, where in Lightroom, in most things, it's 12, 0 to 12, or 1 to 12. In Lightroom, quality is a percent, so it's 0 to 100. Higher number, it's compressed less, bigger file. Lower number, it's compressed more, smaller file. Depending on what you need, I usually do with a higher number just so the quality is higher. You can then select your color space, sRGB, Adobe RGB 98, Pro Photo. You've got a whole bunch of other ones you can select, 8-bit or 16-bit. You can decide if you want to resize. I don't ever typically resize. That's not true. If I'm processing files just to send low res to a client, I'll resize at this point. But when I'm processing anything that's final, I don't ever resize. I always do full. And then you just process it. Boom. Then you go into Lightroom or into Photoshop, or I go into Photoshop. You can do what you want. Go into Photoshop. First thing I do with any file that's made it this far is go into Photoshop, go to 100%, maneuver around the whole file looking for dust. Your sensor has dust on it. Every sensor has dust on it. Even if you cleaned it 10 minutes ago, it has dust on it. Even if you have a mirror, if you don't have a mirror, they all have dust. So I go in into that file and look for the dust and clean it with the spot healing brush in Photoshop. If you're photographing at f4 or 2.8, you may not see the dust. That's fine. If you're at 22 or 32, you're going to see dust. First thing, just go through, remove the dust. I mentioned layers, so create a curves layer. Bump up the contrast a little. And then save that file. All right, so now exporting. Again, back to exporting. I've got my master file, but then I want to export that file for a client. How is the client going to use it? Do they want Adobe RGB 98? Do they want sRGB? And by client, I know I'm talking a lot about clients, but client can be anybody. It doesn't have to be somebody paying you money. It could be your mom, your grandma, your cousin. Maybe you took a really cool picture of your nephew and you want to send it to your brother or sister for them. How are they going to use the picture? What use are they going to have for it? That is something you need to think about for how you're going to deliver that file. So is it Adobe RGB 98? Honestly, most of the time, probably not, unless you're sending it to a designer or somebody. Is it sRGB? Probably. Most of the time it's sRGB. Most of the time I send people sRGB. CMYK, only if someone tells you they need CMYK and they're very specific. CMYK is cyan, magenta, yellow, black. It's for 4-color printing, like for a magazine or something like that. CMYK is a smaller color space, and the conversion can be dicey. If you don't have exactly the right profile, it can be a mess. And it can really make pictures look bad if it's not done right. Pro Photo RGB, I have never once given a client Pro Photo RGB, but you might. And then are you going to deliver the files alone? Are you going to print through a fulfillment service? Are you going to print at home? So files alone, you're just going to email them the pictures, upload the pictures so they can download them, or are you going to send them to a printer? Or are you going to get a nice printer at home and print them on your inkjet? Think about what those are. If you're going to send them to a print on demand service, usually they have settings that they need. So usually they're going to want sRGB, but not always. Sometimes they're going to have a custom profile. If they do, you want to make sure you do convert to profile and not assign profile. So you'll see on the left is convert to profile, on the right is assign profile. The colors are different if you do convert as opposed to assign. All right, so you've done that. Now you want to distribute the images. I use PhotoShelter and WeTransfer. So PhotoShelter is a service that I pay for that allows me to upload files to a folder. I can then either just have them parked there. I can make them available for anybody to see. I can set it so that I can send someone a link to a gallery with a password, upload everything, create a password. If I create that password, I can make it so that person A can download low res, person B can download high res, person C can't download anything, but they can see it. I can set that customization. It makes it very convenient. I can also, sometimes I'll just use WeTransfer if it's to someone who using a password and everything might seem overly complicated. And then if it's video, I use Vimeo and WeTransfer. Vimeo is super easy, just upload, boom. All right. So we've photographed everything, we've processed everything, we've backed up everything, we've distributed everything to wherever it needs to go, to the client, to your mom, to your cousin, to your best friends, wherever it needs to go. Now, I put everything into a Media Pro catalog. So the challenge with Media Pro is that they don't sell Media Pro anymore and it's not supported. I'm still using it. I'm trying to find a good replacement. If you have a good replacement, let me know. All my photos go into a Media Pro catalog so that I have about 90,000 processed files in that catalog. They're on a massive RAID array so that if I need anything, I can sort and find it and just open it up. I also then upload all of those final files to PhotoShelter. So we have RAWs local at home, we have RAWs at the office, we have processed files at the office, we have processed files online so that I can access them from anywhere. If I'm traveling, if I need anything, they're there. Media Pro, I can sort by stars, I can sort by topic, super easy. And then PhotoShelter, I have a 2021 folder, everything from 2021 is there, 2020, 2019. And then on to the next project. All right, we went really fast, I talked really fast. Let's see if there are any questions.
Thank you, Tony. Welcome back, Tony. That's it. Getting done in record time. I like it. I appreciate it. You know, I'm always hungry. I want dinner, right?
It's important. It's almost 6. It's dinner time.
That's right. That's right. People are getting hungry. I'm sure I'm not the only one. But Tony just popped up. In case you want to find him, this is where you can find him. You can stalk him, hunt him down, whatever way you want to get in touch with him. But be nice to him. We like Tony. He's a great guy. So thanks for being back.
Yeah, just be nice in general, not just to me. Just be nice to everybody.
That's true. That should go without saying. But just in case, be extra nice to Tony because we really like Tony. He's a great guy and he's always here. He always helps us out. So we want to take care of him. We want to keep seeing him coming back. So let's start off with Dave from Zoom. He's asking, what do you think about using the cloud as backup? I think that's a great question. I think everybody wonders about it. There's always that hesitation. Where is the cloud? What is the cloud? What do you think about it?
So I do, as I think I mentioned, I do at the end there for my processed files, I do keep a copy on the cloud as a backup. And so I can access it from anywhere I am in the world. I wouldn't use the cloud as your only backup for a couple of reasons. One is it takes forever to upload that stuff. It's just so slow. Even if you have fast internet, it's slow. Takes forever. And you are a little bit at the mercy of whatever service you're using. If something goes wrong with that service, you may have a problem. So I wouldn't use it as your only backup. There's also the challenge of finding something that makes sense financially. So part of the reason I use PhotoShelter is, I think it's $500 or $550 a year, includes unlimited storage. And I have, I don't know, 20 terabytes, 25 terabytes, some huge number uploaded there. A lot of other services that would be prohibitively expensive. And then some of the services that do the auto upload tend to be slow and can be really slow to get your files and download. That said, I think backing up to the cloud, if you can find a service that works for you, is great, but I wouldn't do it as your only backup.
Great. And I think you mentioned before, about the bit rot. I believe was the correct term. And you might have been watching a B&H event, space event, because actually we talked about that last week in an event that we had. Oh. And so for those of you who don't know, like Tony said, definitely make sure you're plugging those drives in, especially on those SSDs. Make sure those motors are running. That was something that was said last week, and that you kind of reminded me. And immediately after that event, I went and plugged all of my drives in, and I made sure that I at least let them run for a few minutes, and kind of opened up some files and made sure everything was functioning. So I think besides just the cloud, if you are using physical storage, which is definitely recommended, I definitely share that sentiment. Make sure you're activating those drives, keeping them moving and keeping them in working order, because otherwise you'll wind up like me with some drives that don't work anymore.
Yeah. Well, and there's files I photographed, images I photographed in the early days of digital that I really liked that I don't know where those are anymore. I didn't have a good workflow. I don't know what drives they were on. Either didn't back them up properly or the drives failed or who knows what, but those images are gone and I don't want them to be gone. I wish I had them. So yeah, be careful. And also with BitRot and everything else, every 2 or 3 years, I migrate everything from the old drives to new drives. I may still use those old drives, reformat them and use them again, but I just keep everything going.
Yes, good idea. So moving right along, Nate's asking, from your standpoint, how is the Sony Catalyst apps compared to others like Bridge?
So Catalyst is only for video. For video, I find it much faster than Bridge, but it's only for video. So it depends on what you're doing. I think Catalyst is great for what it's great for, but I only use it for video. Like there are some things like with the data that some of the newer cameras have where you can stabilize in post, like Catalyst will stabilize that video footage for you. So it does some cool stuff like Bridge can't do that. That's really cool. And Catalyst, I believe it's free. So the price is certainly right.
There you go. You can't complain about free, no matter what. I don't care what the scenario is. If it's free and you're complaining, then
yeah.
Then,
I mean, maybe there might be a paid version of Catalyst too, but the version I've used is free.
Awesome. So going back to talking about software, obviously Adobe is kind of sort of in the industry, the most renowned. Most people, defer to Adobe because it's what everybody kind of has come to grow and understand and gets the most kind of attention out there. But besides Adobe, in your opinion, if you're not using Photoshop and Lightroom, what do you personally suggest or recommend to other people?
So it depends on, are you not using Adobe because for budgetary reasons or because you don't like Adobe for some other reason? There's a lot of stuff out there. So I use Capture One a lot. I'm trying to think of, there's a ton of stuff. There's this piece of software, I can't even think of it. They're based out of Seattle. It's less than $100 that does a ton of stuff. It'll do a lot of automatic stuff for you. I have a copy of it and I never use it. I can't think of what it's called. If you email me, I'll figure it out and get back to you. Although if I don't get back to you right away, just email me again. There's a lot of stuff out there. Adobe is at the top of the heap for a reason, though. I haven't found anything that's as full featured as Photoshop, for example. Photoshop does a lot of stuff really well. And I haven't found anything that does all that stuff as well.
Great. So Ismail wants to know, does the camera manufacturer's software process the raw information best? He's personally noticed color differences in Capture One versus using something like Sony Image Edge.
So best is subjective. I think probably any camera manufacturer's software is going to process it the closest to what that camera manufacturer thinks optimal is. That may or may not be best for you. So for example, if you really like the JPEGs out of your camera and you're shooting RAW plus JPEG and you want those raw process files to look like the JPEGs, then the camera manufacturer software is going to get you the closest to that. Beyond that, they tend to be a little limited. Like they don't have as many options as the third-party stuff. So it's hard to say best, but the closest to the in-camera JPEGs for sure. I don't know if that really answered the question. And if you're not sure, look into doing a custom profile. So you can get something like the Color Checker Passport and create a custom profile for your camera that you can use in Lightroom or Capture One or Adobe Camera Raw or whatever, and see if you're really, really concerned about the best, that's what I would do.
Awesome, great. So Adrian wants to know, in terms of pixels or in terms of resolution, is there an accessible guide to the best settings for saving photos for printing in terms of, whether you're printing smaller prints or larger prints?
There probably is, but I don't know. I mean, the rule of thumb I would go with is 300 pixels per inch at whatever. So if it's an 11 by 14 print, I would do 300 pixels per inch at 11 or 14 inches on the long side. That's what I typically do. I've found that 300 is plenty for anything I've ever printed. And then if it's 4:6, it's smaller, and if it's 16 by 20, it's larger. I also will sometimes just send, make a JPEG of whatever size my master file is and send that. So, the R4 files are 61 megapixels. They're huge. And even if I want a 4:6, I usually won't resize the JPEG. I'll just send that. It'll be fine.
Right. And then,
yeah.
And then just to round it out and finalize it, I saw a few questions came in about this, or comments came in about this. Lee was asking about it. Judy was asking about it. Have you heard about Backblaze? Do you know if that's a good option?
I know that there are people who really like Backblaze. That's what I know. I think it's pretty inexpensive. I think it's slow, but I'm not sure. I haven't used it. I don't want to speak ill of them. But my impression is it's designed more for backing up like all the regular files on your computer than photos that take up a lot of space. That said, I believe it's pretty affordable, and that it just always on and is always on and goes automatically. Try it and see. But I haven't used it personally, so I can't say. It could be the most amazing thing ever. Could be the worst thing ever. I haven't tried it, so I can't say.
Excellent, excellent. Well, Tony, thanks for being back here again. I'm super excited that I got to see you again today, because I haven't seen you. It's been like what, like a month and a half?
I mean, eons.
Eons in this digital virtual era. It feels like an eternity. So so I'm happy that you're back. Hopefully everybody else is happy that you're back as well. And like you said at the beginning of this, you're going to be back a whole lot more in the next 2 months. We're going to see you next month twice, and then we'll see you in September for some in-person events. So if you've been itching to get out of the house and get some interaction and see people again, definitely check those out. They'll be posted to the website pretty shortly. We're just finishing up and putting the final touches on everything to get that out. But Tony, I want to thank you again for being here. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Always a pleasure.
Always a pleasure to have you. I want to thank our sponsors for the event, Sony. Thanks to Sony, whoever's out there listening, watching. We really appreciate you bringing Tony back. It's always a good time when he's around. So for everybody else joining us tonight, we appreciate you tuning in. Check us out. We'll be back here tomorrow, same place, maybe different times, similar times. But this has been another edition of the B&H Virtual Event Space. We'll catch you all on the next one.